Good Monday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for May the 6th. Today we are reading together Psalm number 55. The 55th Psalm is titled by the translators of my Bible, Betrayal by a Friend. The superscription says that it is for the choir director with stringed instruments, a maskil of David, which is similar to the previous three Psalms. Psalms 52 through 55 are all described as maskils of David. There are elements of wisdom within each of these Psalms, elements of wisdom and teaching, but I think there's also an element of this psalm being an imprecatory psalm where God is calling judgment down against an evil person, which, as we'll notice in the psalm, is an evil person that David used to be friends with, that David used to have a relationship with, but that person has betrayed him, has turned against David, and is acting in a very evil manner, so much so that David now calls for God's judgment to come down upon this person. So let me get the text of Psalm 55 on the screen, and we'll read along together here. Psalm 55, beginning in verse number 1. Psalm 55, in verse number 1. God, listen to my prayer, and do not hide from my plea for help. Pay attention to me and answer me. I am restless and in turmoil with my complaints, because of the enemy's words, because of the pressure of the wicked, for they bring down disaster on me and harass me in anger. My heart shudders within me. Terrors of death sweep over me. Fear and trembling grip me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, if only I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and find rest. However far away, or excuse me, how far away I would flee, I would stay in the wilderness, Selah. I would hurry to my shelter from the raging wind and the storm. Lord, confuse and confound their speech, for I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they make the rounds on its walls. Crime and trouble are within it. Destruction is inside it. Oppression and deceit never leave its marketplace. Now, it is not an enemy who insults me. Otherwise, I would bear it. It is not a foe who rises up against me. Otherwise, I could hide from him. But it is you, a man who is my peer, my companion, and good friend. We used to have a close relationship. We walked with the crowd into the house of God. Let death take them by surprise. Let them go down to Sheol alive, because evil is in their homes and within them. But I call to God, and Yahweh will save me. I complain and groan morning, noon, and night, and he hears my voice. Though many are against me, he will redeem me from my battle unharmed. God, the one enthroned from long ago, will hear and will humiliate them, Selah, because they do not change and do not fear God. My friend acts violently against those at peace with him. He hates his covenant. His buttery words are smooth, but war is in his heart. His words are softer than oil, but they are drawn swords. Psalm number, oh, nope, excuse me. Continue on 22 and 23. Cast your burden on Yahweh, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. Definitely did not need to forget that verse. Very important. God, verse 23, you will bring them down to the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and treachery will not live out half their days, but I will trust in you. And that is the conclusion of Psalm number 55, again, entitled Betrayal by a Friend. There is, again, an imprecatory nature of this psalm and also a teaching nature of this psalm. You know, there are, as we've mentioned, 13 psalms that give us pretty clear and specific details about the historical goings on behind these psalms, the motivation, the inspiration. Different words like that might be applied to the notes that are given in the superscription. This one does not give us anything like that. It does not tell us that this is about this occasion or that occasion, so we don't know with certainty. Although some have supposed that maybe the inspiration or the story behind this psalm is what happened with Absalom. his rebellion, his son's rebellion of Absalom, and then the advisor of David who betrays him and goes off with Absalom, Ahithophel. Maybe that is the background behind this psalm. Maybe these men and their betrayal, especially that of Ahithophel, maybe it's his betrayal that spurs on this psalm. We just don't know, but I think there might be some portions of the psalm that would allow that to be the case. Nevertheless, beginning in verse number 1 into the first line of verse number 2, we see here David focusing on his only relief. The only way that he can go, the only one to whom he can go is God. So he has 4 things he asks of God: to listen to his prayer, to not hide from his plea for help, to pay attention to him, and to answer him. I want to focus specifically on this idea of do not hide from my plea or help. This phrase can also be found in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 1 through 4. Excuse me, just one second. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 1 through 4, it is mentioned here about Israel not ignoring an animal that might be in trouble or might be in need, and that they were obligated to help the animal that would be in need. So do not ignore them is the language there. Here the language is do not hide, but again, the same phrase. So the idea behind this then is that if Israel was to pay attention to an animal in need, how much more would God not ignore those who belong to him, especially someone like King David? David recognizes this is a part of God's character. Therefore, he goes to him, his only plea for help. Because David, right now in this situation, verses 2 and 3, he's restless, he's in turmoil, and it's because of his enemies' words, because of the pressure of the wicked. They're bringing disaster on him, they're harassing him in anger. David is in a very, very tough situation, and he knows that only God can help. He further explains the difficulty of the situation when he writes in verses 4 through 8, my heart shudders within me. Terror of death sweep over me. Fear, trembling, horror. And he's saying, what I wish I could do is I wish I could just fly away like a dove. I wish I could just escape the situation, fly away like a dove, go and find some rest. I would even love to go out into the wilderness, as far away from everyone and everything as I possibly could. That's what I want to do. I would hurry to my shelter and I would get out of this storm of life. Well, what's so bad? What's so bad about David's life? I mean, obviously we've seen the issues in verses 2 through 6, or 2 through 5, which talk about his personal issue, but it seems that this issue is even more widespread than that. It's not just things that are happening to him, but it's things that are happening to the city. I see violence, verse number 9. I'll come back to the beginning of verse number 9. I see violence and strife. Day and night it's around: crime, trouble, destruction, oppression, deceit. This city, the description of the city at this point, the condition of the city, is very much the exact opposite of what we see in Psalms 46 and 48, where God's city is described as being a great, strong, mighty city, full of righteousness and goodness. But now it's full of every bad thing. So what does David do? Again, he goes to God. God, confuse and confound their speech. Basically, stop the evil. Don't allow them to continue to communicate, to keep doing this evil. We have Tower of Babel echoes going on here. So everything for David, both personally, communally, everything is in a very tough spot at the moment. The conditions are not good whatsoever. But then David, if we're just reading this psalm for the first time and working our way through it, we're thinking, okay, David's enemies are really on it right now. But the revelation of verses 12 through 14 are stunning, very surprising to us probably. It's not the enemy that insults me. I could deal with that. It's not the foe who's rising up against me. I could deal with that too. That's to be expected. But it is you, a man who is my peer, my companion, and a good friend. We used to have close fellowship. We walked with the crowd into the house of God. This is not the place where David expected for such trouble to come from. And aren't those the situations that hurt the most? when the trouble we are experiencing, with when the persecution that we're going through, when the difficulty we are that is facing us, when it comes from an unexpected place, we expect this stuff from evil people and from people who don't like us, and people who don't respect us, and people who don't have the same standards of morality and such that we have. But what happens if it's someone that you think is on your side? Well, that's whenever it gets, even more difficult. Whenever you think it's coming from a place that you would expect there to be support, but instead you find opposition. So here's the imprecatory nature of the psalm, verse 15. Let death take them by surprise. Let them go down alive to Sheol. Not just because David's upset, but because there's legitimately and objectively evil in their homes. Again, there's maybe echoes here of the sons of Korah, where those who were supposed to be in line with Moses and Aaron end up being against them. David plants his flag in verse 16. But I call to God, and Yahweh will save me. I complain and groan morning and noon and night, and he hears my voice. So the thing that he asked for, that he asked for in verse 1, in the first line of verse number 2, he says, this has happened. He does hear my voice. Though many are against me, he will redeem me. Again, God blessing him and helping him. He will redeem me from my battle unharmed. God, the one enthroned from long ago, will hear and humiliate them because they do not change and do not fear God. So here is the trouble in the first few verses. We come to recognize that the trouble is coming from an unexpected place. David calls for judgment from God upon them. And notice verse 19 is a similar idea to what we've seen in Psalm 52, verse 7, Psalm 54, verse 3, Psalm 53, verse 1, and Psalm 54, verse 3, where we're told that the evil people do not make God their refuge. They act as if there is no God, and they do not allow God to guide them. Now we read they do not fear God. Furthermore, my friend acts violently. He violates his covenants. There's war in his heart. His words are like drawn swords. So his friend is out for blood, causing all sorts of trouble. David expresses that in the first 5 verses, personally how it's affected him, and then how he sees it spreading to other people as well in verses 10 and 11. So here is David's wise advice. Here's the teaching portion. Verse number 22, cast your burden on Yahweh, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. This right here, verse number 22, is the reason why David is so defiant in the face of opposition, even opposition from those who he thought was on his side. This is why he is so defiant. This is why he is so strong in this take, because of verse 22, the faithfulness of God. God's faithfulness to his covenants. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. But here's the contrast. Remember, here is David doing the righteous thing and how God's going to respond to that. Well, here's this other part, verse 23, the other side of the coin. God, you will bring them down to the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and treachery will not live half their days, but I will trust in you. So we have kind of bookends here, verse 22 and the end of verse 23. This is the good stuff. This is what David's going to enjoy because of his trust. But those first 4 lines of verse 23, God, you will bring them down to the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and treachery will not live out half their days. These are the consequences for what we have seen so far in these Psalms. Again, beginning in Psalm 52, going 53, 54, now here in 55, because of the unwillingness to allow God to be the refuge, because of their behavior behaving as if there is no God, because God is not their guide, because they do not fear God and they don't change from that. You will bring them down to destruction. They are men of bloodshed, men of treachery, and they will not live out half their days. So again, this common theme that we've talked about time and time again of 2 paths. Which path are we going to take? The path that leads to God and blessing, or the path that leads away from God and ends up in destruction? David here, in this most difficult situation, again, if you've ever suffered personal betrayal, you know how much this hurts. And yet here is David in this moment of pain, in this moment of suffering, in this moment of great trial and difficulty, he is not giving up. He is not cowering away. He's not retreating, even though he feels like he wants to. Instead, he's going to plant his flag in God. I call to God, and Yahweh will save me. May that be our response if we are ever were to find ourselves in this situation as well. I appreciate you taking some time reading along with me today here in Psalm number 55. If you have any questions about this psalm, please feel free to leave that in the comments section below. And I appreciate you taking some time reading along with me on this Monday. Hope that it starts your week out in a great way, and hope that you are blessed as you go throughout this week, not only just living your life day to day, but doing so knowing that God sees you and that you are somebody who is striving to please God in everything that you do. Again, thanks for tuning in. Looking forward to being with you again on Wednesday morning as we read together from Psalm number 56. No longer a Maskil of David, but this time a Miktam of David. And this one gives us a little detail when the Philistines seized him at Gath. Looking forward to reading that with you on Wednesday. Have a great start to the week. May God bless you in all that you do. See you then.